from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Caroline Hyde, in for Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, we are live in Boise, Idaho. We're over at the Micron headquarters, my exclusive sit-down with the Micron CEO, Sanjay Malhotra, where we talk about all things chips, supply chain, and so much more. Plus, a look at how the global chip shortage is not only impacting Micron, but the real-world impacts it continues to have, and when it might finally ease. And President Biden is amping up Russia sanctions, citing an invasion in Ukraine is underway. We'll bring you the latest from Washington. We'll get to all of that in a moment, but first we've got to get you a look at the markets because, well, once again, risk aversion amid geopolitical tensions. Ed Ludlow with the latest.
Yeah, definitely a risk-off day with Ukraine, Russia top of mind. You look at the S&P 500, the main gauge of US equities, off by 1%, down 10% from a January 3rd peak. So we're in correction territory now. NASDAQ 100 also down 1%, its lowest level since June. Fourth straight day of losses, the longest losing streak in a month. It kind of is adding up, Caroline. And of course, what was interesting is it was a choppy session after President Biden added to the voices globally and added sanctions to those taken by the European Union against Russia and Russian individuals. We saw stocks pair some of those losses, but eventually fall away to some significant degrees. You also see the US 10-year yield a little higher at 1.94%. And Bitcoin, you're seeing red on the screen now as we tick over into Wednesday's session, but we're actually higher, snapping 3 days of losses, of course, over that long holiday weekend. One of the really big movers on the day tied to the Ukraine-Russia tensions, nickel. Come with me into my Bloomberg terminal. Look at this chart. The white line heading towards that $25,000 per ton. That's the London contract for nickel. And the supply, you can see the blue line coming down. Russia is one of the biggest exporters of nickel. So concerns are that sanctions could add to already stressed supply. Of course, nickel is such an important component in EV batteries, which is, of course, why I'm loving to talk about it. Really big move you see there on Tuesday. Let's talk a little bit big picture here about what investors feel about this whole situation. Bank of America out with a note on Tuesday saying that tech stocks are in purgatory, Caroline. We have rising rates, we have guidance misses, but ultimately, the S&P 500 only has 0.1% sales exposure to Russia directly. We should be more worried about tech stocks and the outlook for that sector with the higher rates that are happening and also COVID-induced pain, some of the most sort of sought-after stocks during the pandemic era now becoming unloved. So let's take this in stock. Yes, the situation's worrying, but investors really focus in the equity markets at least on that outlook for higher rates.
Yeah, still all about the Fed. Ed Ludlow, we thank you so much. Going to be checking him out in a minute. But first and foremost, let's get to really the geopolitical story of the day. President Biden announcing that the United States was ordering pretty heavy financial sanctions against Russian banks and oligarchs, declaring that Moscow had flagrantly violated international law by invading Ukraine. Now, Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horden joins us now with more. The perfect voice, a woman who understands Putin, Russia, and indeed the White House. Tell us a little bit about the reaction to what are perhaps not the toughest of sanctions yet.
Yeah, so on those sanctions, Caroline, that's correct. These aren't the toughest of sanctions, and the scope that they can dig in and push against on Russia. This is what the president called Tranche 1, echoing the words as well from UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So they're sanctioning 2 banks and also a number of individuals very close to the Kremlin, as well as sovereign debt. Now, the primary debt market was already sanctioned in Russia, so this would be the secondary debt market. But Caroline, on the diplomacy front, I want to bring you just some new information. We just had the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, speaking alongside his Ukrainian counterpart, and that meeting he was planned to attend at the end of next week with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, has been canceled. He has said that this is, now that we see the invasion is beginning and Russia has made clear its wholesale rejection of diplomacy, it does not make sense to go forward with that meeting at this time. Blinken says they do want to remain a path open for diplomacy, but his words, only when Russia is serious about it.
Okay, so where's the path to be opened? What's the next step? Do we have to await some sort of words coming from Putin or indeed one of his team?
It's a great question, but prior to this meeting being scheduled, and it was being scheduled, was a caveat, and that was from the State Department saying we will only attend this meeting if there's no further invasion of Ukraine. And obviously, over the weekend, what we had from Russia is President Vladimir Putin recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk as separate states. Now, the United States says this goes and infringes upon the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. So I think at this moment, given the fact that the U.S. is saying this meeting is canceled, the ball now is in the Kremlin's court.
Indeed it is, and we wait and we watch, and the market implications thereof of energy prices, metal prices, gas prices, you name it. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hodden with the political angle to all of this. And we're going to have more of the corporate angle, in fact, because coming up, more of my exclusive interview with the Micron CEO. He's Sanjay Malhotra. We sat here in Boise, Idaho, in the R&D headquarters of Micron. We talked about, well, the state of global chip-making industry. In fact, how the exposure to Russia and Ukraine is impacting some of those supply chain bottlenecks already, of course, being sustained by the semiconductor industry. This is Bloomberg.
I will tell you that semiconductor supply chain is highly complex, highly intertwined. And sometimes there can be other secondary suppliers of the suppliers. And these are the things that it's important that the situation de-escalates so that no surprises show up for anybody in the ecosystem.
Car makers slashed production. PlayStations became impossible to find. Even everyday appliances were on backorder. These phenomena all had a similar cause, an abrupt and cascading shortage of semiconductors. So what caused the shortfall? The stay-at-home shift triggered by the pandemic rearranged supply and demand. When certain businesses shut down, suppliers started to direct chips to phone and computer makers. Then, when the economy started to reopen, industries like automakers that had cut back on orders then rushed to re-up. The supply chain and capacity could not meet this surge in demand.
COVID caused everybody to step back a bit from capacity and build out in the supply chain of the industry, and it induced a radical increase in demand. So you have supply chains scaling back a bit and demand scaling up radically. Wow, and now we're in a position that there's a meaningful shortage.
This race for chips led to skyrocketing lead times, with the time gap between ordering a chip and delivery hitting records. In response, chip makers are now competing to play catch-up, and in the process, spending big bucks to increase capacity.
I would say it's a competitive world, and we're going to be very competitive in the process.
Micron is set to spend as much as $12 billion on new plants and equipment this fiscal year, part of a broader $150 billion spending plan. Intel, it unveiled a plan to invest as much as $28 billion, including fabs in the US. While in Asia, TSMC has a budget of as much as $40 billion for capacity expansion. With hundreds of billions of dollars at stake in the coming years, the global race to expand production is in full effect. Some executives say that despite all this money and effort, it still may not be enough to equal demand.
I think for the better part of the next 4 to 5 years, our industry, including global foundries, will be chasing the ability to put capacity online to meet not only the demand that's in front of us today, but the growing demand.
As companies go all in and move their chips to the center of the table, global investors are placing bets on who will prevail in the coming decade.
And I got to extend that conversation on all things supply chain to do with chips with Micron CEO Sanjay Malhotra right here at the company's headquarters in Boise, Idaho. And we spoke about everything from the chip crisis to supply chain issues to innovation and the 49,000 patents that they have here. And I asked him if there was a light in particular to do with supply chain headaches at the end of the tunnel. Here's what he had to say.
So with respect to our own supply chain operations during the period of COVID over the last 2 years, what has been demonstrated is that a lot of the work that we were doing pre-COVID as well, in terms of building redundancy in our supply chain, deep analytics, again, working on our suppliers and their suppliers, and making sure that we have capacity, all that work served us well. Of course, The COVID presented unprecedented level of challenges for everybody, and our teams were extremely agile and adaptive in terms of responding to those challenges. And I'm very proud of our global supply chain operations in how they tackled those and largely have been able to meet the demand sufficiently well and manage the mix and continuing to work with our suppliers. Regarding the current situation, what I would say is that when we were coming into the year, we certainly expected that supply chain shortages will continue to improve during the course of the year for non-memory components that we procure from other suppliers. While we see that many areas of those components, we are continuing to see improvements in certain categories of those components, the rate of improvement is behind what we were hoping for. However, we will, of course, continuing to work with our suppliers, with our partners to have them increase our supply to meet the demand. So some of these supply chain shortages in the industry, these are phenomena that are common to the industry, I believe will continue to improve through the year in many areas, while they may continue to have challenges in certain other areas. And there's a lot of focus in the entire ecosystem on the part of the industry to continue to address these situations.
Because so many of the fabs have been running at full pelt. They needed to meet demand. And I think of NAND production that's recently been hit in the memory space by contamination within a US manufacturer. Do you think that these incidents might continue to occur? Do you worry that prices many felt prices would fall for chips coming into the end of the year? Will they actually rise, do you think?
So, Micron is a great example of world's leading semiconductor memory technology and production. What you're seeing here in this Boise site is world's leading R&D facility. And from here, we fuel new technologies that go into production at our sites worldwide, including in Japan, in Taiwan, in Singapore, and of course, here in the US as well. So what's important is to realize, that, with the example that you gave of other suppliers of NAND memory who have recently been hit with certain production challenges, what's important to realize is that, again, semiconductor production, as you saw in the tour today, is highly complex. Let me just give you an example. We produce several million wafers a year for our semiconductor memory and storage products. Our engineers are working around the clock, of course, with deep data analytics technologies involved as well, to, in a very productively paranoid, and absolutely tremendous attention to detail to monitor many, many parameters. Let me just give you an example. We have about 230 million parameters that are being controlled, constantly monitored at all times in our production across the fabs. This is what is needed to absolutely make sure that the production runs uninterrupted, and our teams have done an amazing job in this regard.
What about your work with the government? I know you're a man who has been speaking to the Commerce Secretary, to the administration. They see the supply chain issues, and they want to bring it closer to the home. They want to make sure manufacturing is back in the United States. They're offering about $50 billion, for example. Is that enough to make you build once again in the US even more? I know you're already in Virginia, you're expanding here where we sit, but will it make the US a powerhouse again? Yeah.
Micron is investing in terms of really building the future of memory. The leading edge technologies are being developed right here in this R&D facilities. Micron is leading with respect to DRAM and NAND technology. We are ahead in production with those most advanced technologies versus any other competitor. So really very proud of the work that gets produced here and is taken into production in other sites. I'm also highly appreciative of the work that President Biden's administration is doing. Secretary Raimondo is championing, and of course, having bipartisan support in Congress as well for securing the long-term leadership in semiconductor research, as well as bolstering semiconductor manufacturing here in the US through CHIPS Acts and investment tax credits. The $50 billion that you talked about is a good start, and we of course have to get it across the finish line, but then, in the longer term, more will have to be supported. It is critically important, just as COVID has shown, that we need to have resilient supply chain, diversified supply chain and manufacturing footprint in the US would be important. We have announced a plan for more than $150 billion investments over 10 years.
But how much here?
In leading edge R&D and manufacturing around the globe. And of course, what will be important is to have the necessary support from government to overcome the up to 45% cost difference that exists versus Asia production. And of course, Micron has been investing here in leading edge R&D. I mean, this facility that you're seeing here and the tools, most advanced tools that will go into this facility to drive innovation forward will be, you know, quickly adding up to $1 billion here in the US itself.
Yeah.
And we are investing at record level in CapEx in our fiscal year 22 around our global sites.
Micron CEO there, Sanjay Malhotra. And a little later, I'll be joined live by a VP of Micron's DRAM process integration. You do not want to miss that conversation. Meanwhile, coming up, we'll stay in Boise. We're going to talk about, well, the tech startup scene right here. Mike Self's going to be with us. Stage.O Ventures. That's next. This is Bloomberg. I'm Caroline Hyde in Boise, Idaho, and the Micron headquarters. And we want to talk a little bit more about, well, the tech scene, the evolving venture capital space that is currently building in places just like Boise, away from Silicon Valley and perhaps away from New York, and instead finding slightly cheaper homes, maybe. I want to bring in Mike Self for this. He is, well, the co-founder. He's also the managing partner at Stage.O Ventures, an early-stage venture capital firm with an office that is right here in Boise. Talk to us about, Mike, what attracted you, first and foremost? Why bring the capital to this ecosystem?
Hi, Caroline. Thanks for having us on, and welcome to Idaho. Our first fund was actually in Seattle, and we were geographically agnostic. We invested really across the country. And one of the things that we noticed in investing in big major tech hubs was it started to become a bit cost prohibitive. And so we started exploring some of the Mountain West cities, and we started in Boise and Idaho, and quite frankly, never left. We really found the strength of the region was really the intellectual capital that was already here. And there was almost an underground railroad of sorts of folks that were commuting from Silicon Valley, but living here in Idaho. And so the combination of that, and then if you do any sort of analysis of what created tech hubs in the past, the HPs of the world created Silicon Valley. Microsoft helped create the tech ecosystem in Seattle, Dell in Austin, and so on and so forth. And we have Micron right here in Idaho. And so that was one of the important characteristics for us to come. And then lastly, you know, with Governor Little's leadership, it really provided a great and stable business environment for us to come and build companies. And when you're in venture, you need to think 10 and 20 years out.
So talk to us about, you know, 2 funds, 23 investments, if that's still up to date. What sort of companies are being built here that really stand above, head and shoulders above the rest?
Yeah, so we focus on, our focus is in getting companies from commercialization funded through healthy Series A and Series B investments. And so if you can do that, then you have a really good chance for success for our entrepreneurs. And so really kind of the same companies that you're seeing in other large established tech ecosystems can be built right here in Idaho, from cybersecurity companies like Plextrack, for example, that just raised a $70 million round led by Insight Partners out of New York, all the way to fintech companies, AI auto finance companies, kind of the same broad swath that you'll find in bigger tech ecosystems. Entrepreneurs are either here and want to start those companies, or are reaching out and are willing to move here to start their companies. So it's really an exciting time for Idaho.
And is the tech talent coming here? Is it being bred here? Because there's a lot of academia right here in Boise.
Yeah, it's really a combination of both. We came here in 2018, and we were just impressed with the folks that were already here. We certainly could not have predicted the pandemic, but that certainly has helped. I like to say that Idaho used to be a flyover state. I think it's now a fly-to state. We've had entrepreneurs that have moved here and are thriving here, and it's a great combination of finding intellectual capital and an affordable place to be able to grow your business.
Mike, talk to us about the affordability, because as we've seen with COVID, suddenly places like Austin, like Boise are, well, becoming more expensive. Does that at any point become a hindrance, or for now is it okay?
Yeah, look, it's caught up over the last 24 months. I think that the delta change from Salt Lake, San Francisco, Seattle to Boise has changed. I mean, real estate's been as hot here as anywhere in the country. But on a relative standpoint, your day-to-day living and what it takes to start a business and grow a business, it's still very advantageous to be here. And it's not just a cost arbitrage and why you should start your company in Idaho. It's about, you're providing a great place for employees to be able to have a nice work-life balance. And we really view Idaho as kind of being an intersection in between, geographically, in between the Pacific Northwest, Silicon Valley, and the rest of the Mountain West. It's a 30-minute flight to Salt Lake. It's an hour and a half to San Francisco and an hour to Seattle. So we see the growth here just accelerating. So it's not just a overall cost arbitrage.
What do you think about now more VC coming as well? You've got the startups. Is more venture capital going to be bred here too?
Yeah, we're hoping so. We've said that if we're the only ones here, 10 years from now, we haven't done our job. So, we have a very specific strategy where we invest in by practitioner for practitioner entrepreneurs. And so, we definitely need more to continue to build the ecosystem here. And look, we think that that's happening. When you see Andreessen Horowitz, when you see Bessemer, when you see Insight Partners, when you see Madrona coming here and writing sizable checks in the region, that really helps get the flywheel going, and not only for the entrepreneurs, but for other VCs. So we're hoping that we have more competition here really soon, and we think that that's coming.
Flywheel to the fly too. We thank you, Mike Self, co-founder, managing partner at Stage.O Ventures. Really great to have some time with you, talking all things VC in Boise. Meanwhile, coming up, I'm going to be joined by Thi Tran. She's the VP of Micron's DRAM process integration. We're going to talk about, well, look, the technological innovation that's happening right here, right now. I've seen the lists of the patents that are being built, on average 3 per day coming out of Micron. So we're going to talk about her nearly 30 years in the business to help inspire also the next generation of female innovators in particular. Plus later, well, the mayor of Boise, Lauren McLean, my conversation with her on a boom of job creation in the city. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in Boise, Idaho today at the headquarters of Micron Technology. Now let's get back to the markets and a check on the day's, well, chip news in particular. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow standing by.
Yeah, we got to. And actually, if you look across the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, Caroline, there's only one name on Tuesday that was really in the green, and that was Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, up 1.6%, while the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index fared slightly better than the broader market, down 0.8 of 1%, but still down nonetheless. Why? Bernstein turning bullish on this stock for the first time in a decade, bringing an outperform rating from a market perform rating at a price target of $150. They basically said, we got it wrong. We were late to the game. And of course, there was another milestone closed. With that 1.6% gain, AMD closed with a market value of $188.3 billion. Why is that significant? Bring up the next board, because it gives it a market cap greater than Intel. And this has really been the story. The orange line, AMD, really outperforming Intel over the last 12 months or so. Why? Because it's also outperformed in the industry, stealing market share in that highly competitive server chip space. And it's definitely a stock that analysts have favored. They say this is one to watch, and Bernstein finally coming around. There is this bigger picture, though, that we spoke about earlier with tech stocks, right? Semiconductors, just like some of their software cousins in the tech sector, suffer from this idea of stretched valuations. But Bernstein actually saying that AMD is relatively cheap. If you look at how the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index has performed year to date relative to the S&P 500 or even the NASDAQ 100, you can see there the orange line, the S&P 500, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, or SOX, the white line, has really underperformed. But you have to remember, it had such incredible outperformance in 2021, such a big run-up. But AMD, one of the winners on Tuesday.
Ed, great breakdown. Thank you. And we want to keep on the subject of more winners in the chip space. And we want to be talking now about the focus on memory chips, because, of course, we're sat here in Micron, and I'm joined now by the Vice President, Micron's DRAM process integration. It's T. Tran. It's great to have some time with you, T. And where Micron has managed to dominate and survived and become one of the few, well, it's an oligopoly now, is within the memory space, is within DRAM. What is it now that you're doing to differentiate yourself? Because everyone says it's commoditized space, but it's not, right?
Exactly. So we basically develop our memory technology to be industry leaders in both DRAM and NAND flash memory. And we do that to provide a wide flexibility for product portfolio. And we continue to shrink so that we can reduce the cost and increase the density of our memory chips.
And I've just been inside some of your fab here, R&D fab, which is phenomenal. I mean, I got in my bunny suit, I went around to keep it clean, and the machinery that is needed to, just talking about, what is it, sort of 60 or 600 different chemicals, different gases that are needed to produce this tiny piece of wafer. Just talk to us about the intricacies involved in continuing to shrink semiconductors.
Yes, absolutely. It's gotten to be so complex that, it's over thousands of steps, and we basically use almost all of the elements on the periodic table. And, my team takes it from paper studies to, defining the structural dimensions, the physical dimensions, and the electrical requirements to meet the customer requirements for market demands. And it's basically, if you think about building billions of Lego chips, right, and trying to build an Empire State Building out of that, and we do this day in, day out, and virtually defect-free. So it's incredible the innovation that's required to, innovate from the process development standpoint, using new materials and the most advanced tools possible. To basically meet all of the demand that's out there.
Talk to us about that demand. Where indeed is it coming from? I hear a lot about data centers, a lot about autos, but everyone, I feel, there's always a cynical analyst going, this is the same as before, it'll be a boom and then there'll be a bust. But fundamentally, has the demand picture changed to stop that happening?
Actually, if you think about our daily lives, right, without memory, I think life would come to a screeching halt. Memory is in everything we use, and some of the trends show that, besides the data centers and, enterprise storage applications, the advanced automotive applications require AI, requires machine learning, and we basically, have to have enough, faster memory, more density to store all that data. And applying new technologies like 5G and IoT to leverage that data and put more value to it. So we'll always need more edge computing, cloud computing. And if you really want to hit it home, we basically, with the video calls, work from home, all the infotainment that we need memory for, and gaming and even telemedicine, it's you can never have enough memory.
Okay, so you feel the demand picture is very solid. What about, therefore, we had a long discussion about supply chain, the intricacies therein with Sanjay earlier, but what about the talent pipeline to feed that? Because we sit here and see that you're beefing up your infrastructure on the ground. There's talk, of course, about the United States wanting to ensure that people are building more fabs locally. But what about the talent to go in those fabs? Is that being built up enough in the United States?
The talent needs more help from all the way back to all the STEM programs from elementary all the way through high school and higher education. We being good corporate citizens, companies also need to not only provide the funding, but also sponsor and provide mentorship programs for these programs that help also underprivileged, people to.
I know that's something that you're very passionate about. Yeah. You didn't have the most obvious route to becoming a senior executive at a huge company based in the United States. Talk to us a little bit about your journey.
Yes, my journey from refugee to VP at Micron Technology is a story of survival, resilience, and really living the American dream. My father, after the Vietnam War ended, my father was imprisoned by the communist government for 10 years. So we had to escape from Vietnam. We tried 3 times and finally survived Thai pirates and harrowing storms to make it to Thailand. Lived in a refugee camp and before we made it to the U.S. And in terms of resilience, we started from scratch, held multiple jobs at 6 paper routes and I don't know how many jobs during high school and college. But we managed to survive and turn setbacks into comebacks. And electrical engineering was really my ticket out of poverty. It started as a practical decision, but along the way I learned to hone my craft and really find my groove, especially when I started at Micron. And I'm like in the zone when it comes to semiconductor. I lead a very talented team, so I'm very grateful to be where I am today, and for the people that have helped me throughout my career.
A really powerful story. What do the rest of your colleagues and the talented team you have look like? Because I note that Sanjay himself coming from India, you coming from outside of the US, how are you making sure that the talent pool here is so rich, so diverse, and doesn't look like what a lot of people envisage Silicon Valley to look like?
Well, talent attracts talent. So, we have already a talented team here. It's a global team, but we also have a lot of technology development talent here in Boise. We, in order to attract talent, we need to also offer opportunities for growth and leadership and, our innovative prowess, as you probably saw with our patent wall, over 48,500 patents, to date. So, we foster an environment with innovation where people strive, and really thrive in terms of their career development.
Tia, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you so much. Tia Tran, VP of Micron. What a story. Meanwhile, coming up, I sit down with Boise's mayor, Lauren McLean, to talk about all of this, particularly talent, chip making, bringing jobs to the city, and how else it's affecting the city of Boise. More on that next. This is Bloomberg. I'm Caroline Hyde here in Boise, Idaho, at the Micron headquarters. Let's take a look at crypto markets now for our crypto report. Bloomberg's Shonali Basak, take it away.
Thanks, Caroline. Let's take a look at where crypto prices have gone first over the last day or so, because we did start to get a little bit of lift in crypto prices over one day after 5 straight days of declines. But if you take a look at that price, that still has not breached $38,000 and is still on the decline right now, down over the last 2 days still. And so even with the most recent bid, you're not seeing much of a rise. If you take a look also at the drawdown we've seen in Bitcoin, you're seeing that not only have you had a 10-day decline here over the last 10 days of Bitcoin trading, you have had a significant drawdown from last year over the highs of Bitcoin. You have gotten from almost $70,000, more than $67,000, to a 44% drawdown. Let's flip up the screen here and take a look at just what that means. The drawdown now is not the worst that we've seen it in the last year, Caroline, but it is among the worst that we've seen from those highs that we were talking about just a moment ago. So let's see if this means that we're close to hitting a floor, or if there will be a ways to go as risk starts to wean off of markets.
Talking technicals, Shonali Basak, we love it. Thank you so much on the crypto update. Meanwhile, let's get you back up to date with Boise, because right here in Idaho, my colleagues Taylor Riggs, Romain Bostick, and I managed to have a good chat with the mayor, Lauren McLean, about how the chip industry and rising tech scene is affecting, well, the city's job market. Take a listen.
What we've done here in Boise throughout the last 2 decades is create a community that welcomes everyone and supports a technology sector that makes those jobs available. In fact, I moved here right out of college. So this is the one home that I've had as an adult, and it was the technology space that recruited my husband and I to move here. And as has been mentioned, the last 20 years, just as Micron's grown, the technology sector has grown here as well.
Well, give us a sense here, Mayor, for those of us who aren't all that familiar with Boise here. What's the attraction for companies like that? What's the attraction for employees to come there? Why are they choosing there versus other sort of major coastal hubs?
Well, we have a community that really welcomes everyone, and Micron in particular has helped lead the way when it comes to creating an inclusive and diverse community. We've got a great landscape with a beautiful, clean river, open space for folks to enjoy, but importantly, growing economic opportunity as the tech space in particular continues to grow, whether it be small companies that started out in the last 10 years have grown or been acquired, or companies that have grown right alongside the city like Micron in the last 20 years.
We've been speaking to Micron, we've been speaking to Clearwater, for example, as well, one that's been growing here. I just flew into Boise Airport. It's great, fantastic infrastructure. But is it enough when you start to see more and more people coming, when you see that suddenly they're all racing for homes, when we're looking stress on hospitals and the like? What are you doing to ensure that the standard of living people are so used to here remains intact?
You know, Boiseans have always valued investing. In fact, just this last fall, we passed a massive water bond to make sure that our water remains clean, that we can grow and create the infrastructure we need. In fact, are piloting a clean water and water renewal project with Micron in particular. Housing is really important. Just as every community around the country is grappling with the rising costs of housing, we're remaining focused on making sure we've got great education, good workforce, partnership with business and industry helping us address affordability, and then creating the economic opportunity of the future to support the residents that are here, and then, of course, welcome more that are coming.
Talk to us then about the balance sheet, the fundamentals of a city. Rising property taxes and sales taxes can certainly help, but you also are known for being one of the lower tax states. How are you thinking about financing this and balancing a budget?
Sure. Well, we in Idaho, and particularly in Boise, pride ourselves with great financial management. And our budget can only grow a certain amount every year. And we prioritize investments that keep the level of quality of life and the level of service that our residents come to expect in that budgeting. Of course, we have to work with private industry, other agencies, and the state to do what's needed to address affordability, to support workforce development, to make sure our kids are educated well and prepped for STEM jobs of the future, all while doing what Idahoans do well, which is budget soundly.
Boise Mayor there, Lauren McLean. Great to have some time with her. Meanwhile, coming up, we're going to be discussing the chip shortage a little bit more, which just isn't going away anytime soon, at least not according to my next guests, when the crunch could calm and help ease supply chain concerns as well. That's next. This is Bloomberg. I'm Caroline Hyde in Boise at the headquarters of Micron, and I want to continue our ongoing conversation. We've actually been having it for about 4 hours now about supply chain issues, the chip crunch. I want to welcome Joanne Feeney. She's a partner at Advisors Capital Management, friend of the show, and a portfolio manager, of course. Also joined by Bloomberg's Ian King, who covers all things chips for us, has helped educate me as to what is necessary to potentially look through what is right now a supply chain headache that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. Ian, talk to us first and foremost about why some thought 2022 would be the time that prices would fall off, that we'd actually start to see maybe a right-sizing of supply-demand, but it doesn't seem to be happening quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend who you speak to and which sector you're talking about. You know, a lot of the industry had said second half of 2022, things begin to get better. But then we're hearing, you know, a lot of talk about people saying, well, perhaps we don't get back to balance in certain products until 2023. A lot of that has to do with who you are and what you're asking for. And I think a lot of people will point to the automotive industry as being the biggest victims because, frankly, they were late to realize that they had a problem, and they were late, and they had to join sort of the end of the queue to get what they needed.
Joanne, your take as an investor about the boom-bust cycle, because right now we're hearing this call not only from the administration looking to see government putting billions, 50 billion to work to incentivize companies to build supply here in the United States, but already people looking at what's going to come on tap by 2023. Are we going to see a sudden flood of supply? Are we once again going to go back into the boom-bust cycle of previous?
Yeah, great question, Caroline, and hello, and hi, Ian. Nice to see you again. Clearly we are still at a point where demand is far outstripping supply, and that's simply because it takes a long time to build these fabs. This middle of this year, we're going to have more fabs come online, so we'll start to see the supply that is needed. But yeah, it looks like the real influx of supply as those fabs ramp up isn't going to be until 2023. Whether that leads to a bust, I think at this point is pretty unlikely. If you look at how many cars are being produced relative to pre-pandemic, we're still well below that number. And then add to that the fact that content per car has risen. And then you take that and you spread it around the rest of the economy, whether it's in households and the amount of chips there, medical equipment, factory automation, the use of robotics. I mean, there's just such a big increase in content that I think it's going to take actually quite a long time for supply to catch up to demand. And, so I don't anticipate a bust anytime soon. The subsidy from the US government could complicate matters because that means that the industry is going to be bigger than they would be if left to their own devices. And that does mean overcapacity at some point, but it's going to take a number of years before we get to that.
Ian, this is, of course, the overcapacity that many know and understand and that companies desperately try to fine-tune and avoid. But from your perspective, with the government incentives that are being talked of, will you see a shift towards at least more supply being grown in the United States? Will we see less risk to supply chains going forward as we've had in the past?
Well, I mean, that is the argument being made by executives who essentially want government to help subsidize their expansion plans. Makes complete sense that you would ring that bell and get the attention of politicians, get them behind that. But when you actually look at the amount of money being deployed and whether that will ultimately have the kind of impact that the politicians are hoping for, it remains to be seen. I mean, just compare the numbers, right? 52 billion from the US over 5 years versus 40 billion being budgeted by TSMC alone this year. That gives you an example of really how little the national governments are deploying in terms of capital, and really tells you that they probably don't understand the long-term requirements and commitments that are needed.
Joanne, to that point, the investment decision you therefore make, do you want to be investing in companies that are maybe taking on short-term incentives but longer-term less economic sense than producing out of Asia?
Yeah, Ian's exactly right. It's not going to be a big incremental addition. And moreover, the subsidies to the companies to build these fabs means that their depreciation costs will be lower than otherwise. So they'll have a little bit of a buffer. And probably even more importantly is how the industry has changed over the last decade or so, right? The chips are used now in a much wider variety of locations. And so it tends to be less cyclical than it was primarily PCs and servers. So that helps to smooth out some of the cyclical, problems that we've run into in the past with this industry. And, even beyond that, just think about, again, that rise in content that's coming. I don't think the US subsidy is really going to add all that much. Again, on the margin, yeah, we'll probably get a little extra capacity. It'll be in the US, but that's also not going to eliminate the risk of shortages. Look what happened this time around. It was the auto sector that chose to cancel their orders because they thought demand for cars was going to go away at the beginning of the pandemic. That led to their shortage problem. They couldn't get back in line fast enough. And so, and the big shock of how behavior changed because of COVID, that really increased the demand for everything with chips in it. Those shocks can happen no matter what the government does. But having a bit more reliance on U.S. factors at least will limit our exposure potentially to some political risks that are out.
Well said. I mean, if COVID has taught us anything and geopolitics continues to, it's diversification that you want in terms of your supply chain. Joanne Feeney, we thank you so much, Advisors Capital Management, and of course our own Ian King of Bloomberg News. Thank you both. Now that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. But tomorrow we're going to be talking to Jonathan Johnson, CEO of Overstock, and along with Jeff Lawson, co-founder and CEO of Twilio.